The Dark Ages. What comes to mind? Mud, plagues, illiterate peasants, maybe a knight in rusty armor. For centuries, we've been taught to see the period between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance as a 1,000-year-long night, a time of ignorance, superstition, and stagnation. But what if I told you that this entire concept is one of history's biggest misconceptions? What if the Dark Ages were actually a time of incredible innovation, cultural exchange, and foundational discoveries that literally shaped the world we live in today? Stick around, because we're about to turn on the lights and reveal the truth about this misunderstood era. Let's start with where the name even came from. The term Dark Ages was coined by the Italian scholar Petrarch in the 14th century. He was a huge fan of ancient Greece and Rome, and looking back, he saw the centuries after Rome's collapse as a dark period of cultural decline. Later, Enlightenment thinkers doubled down on this idea, contrasting their own age of reason with what they saw as a millennium of religious dogma and ignorance. It's a powerful story, but it's a story told by people with a specific agenda to make their own time look brighter by comparison. The problem is, this narrative completely ignores what was actually happening across the world. While Western Europe was indeed going through a major political shakeup after Rome fell, it wasn't a complete cultural void. The real story isn't one of darkness, but of decentralization. Knowledge didn't disappear, it just moved. Monasteries became the unlikely guardians of Western knowledge. Monks weren't just praying all day. They were painstakingly copying ancient texts by hand, from Roman literature to Greek philosophy. Without these scriptoriums, works by Aristotle, Plato, and Virgil would have been lost forever. They were the hard drives of the medieval world, preserving data for future generations. These weren't just passive copiers either. They created stunning illuminated manuscripts, turning books into breathtaking works of art, blending literacy with incredible craftsmanship. And what about science? The popular image is that science was dead, crushed by the church. That's simply not true. In fact, the seeds of the modern university system were sown in the Middle Ages. The University of Bologna, the University of Paris, Oxford, Cambridge all were founded during this period. They became centers for intellectual debate, where scholars wrestled with theology, law, medicine, and what they called natural philosophy, what we would call science. Thinkers like Roger Bacon, a 13th-century Franciscan friar, were champions of the empirical method, arguing that knowledge must be based on observation and experimentation. Hundreds of years before the scientific revolution, people were already laying the groundwork. Now, let's zoom out from Europe, because this is where the Dark Ages label truly falls apart. While Europe was reorganizing itself, the Islamic world was experiencing its golden age. From the 8th to the 14th century, cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba were the world's leading centers of science, medicine, and philosophy. Scholars in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad translated the great works of Greece, Persia, and India into Arabic. They didn't just preserve this knowledge, they built upon it. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gave us the word algorithm, pioneered algebra. His work introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals to the world, including the revolutionary concept of zero. Can you imagine doing complex math with Roman numerals? It would be a nightmare. Ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as Alhazen, made groundbreaking discoveries in optics, developing a theory of vision that correctly stated that we see because light reflects off objects and enters our eyes. He built the first camera obscura, a key step toward the invention of the photograph. In medicine, doctors like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina Avicenna wrote encyclopedic medical texts that were used as standard textbooks in European universities for centuries. This wasn't a dark age. This was a brilliant beacon of learning and discovery. And it wasn't happening in isolation. This was a profoundly interconnected world. The Silk Road wasn't just for trading silk and spices. It was an information superhighway. Ideas, technologies, and innovations flowed freely between China, India, the Middle East, and Europe. Papermaking technology, which had been invented in China, traveled along these routes and reached Europe via the Islamic world, making books cheaper and more accessible. The compass, another Chinese invention, revolutionized navigation. Gunpowder, also from China, would eventually change warfare forever. Inventions we often take for credit in Europe actually have much deeper, more global roots. Take the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg's invention in the 15th century was revolutionary, no doubt, but movable type technology was actually developed in China for centuries earlier by a man named Bai Sheng. The concept traveled westward, and Gutenberg's genius was in creating a practical, efficient system using metal type that worked well with the Latin alphabet. It is a perfect example of how the Middle Ages worked. It wasn't about singular geniuses, inventing things from scratch in a vacuum. It was about the transmission, adaptation, and improvement of ideas across cultures. Let's talk about engineering for a moment. Think of a Gothic cathedral, like Notre Dame in Paris or Chartres Cathedral. These aren't crude huts. They are masterpieces of engineering and mathematics. Medieval architects developed innovations like the pointed arch, the ribbed vault, and the flying buttress. These weren't just for decoration. They were sophisticated structural solutions that allowed builders to open up massive walls for huge stained glass windows, flooding the interiors with light. They were reaching for the heavens with stone and glass, creating spaces that were designed to inspire awe. This required an advanced understanding of geometry, physics, and material science. To call the people who built these structures backward is simply absurd. Even on a smaller scale, agricultural technology boomed. The invention of the heavy plow allowed farmers to cultivate the dense, wet soils of northern Europe, dramatically increasing food production. The horse collar, which replaced the old neck harness that choked the animal, allowed horses to pull with much greater force. Crop rotation systems became more sophisticated. All of this led to a population boom in the High Middle Ages. More food meant more people, which meant the growth of towns and cities, specialized labor, and the development of a market economy. It was a slow but steady revolution that laid the economic foundations for modern Europe. So why does the Dark Ages myth persist? It's a simple, dramatic story that's easy to remember. It fits neatly into a narrative of linear progress, from the light of Rome to the darkness of the Middle Ages, and back to the light of the Renaissance. But history is never that simple. It's messy, complex, and interconnected. The period we call the Middle Ages was not an interruption of history. It was a crucial, formative period. It was the time when the foundations of modern languages, nations, laws, universities, and scientific methods were laid. The fall of Rome didn't create a vacuum. It created space for new cultures and ideas to emerge and blend. The vibrant intellectual life of the Islamic world and the technological prowess of China were not isolated phenomena. They were part of a global network of exchange that enriched every corner of the known world. The Renaissance didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was built directly on the intellectual and cultural scaffolding that had been constructed, piece by piece, throughout the Middle Ages, often using knowledge that had been preserved and advanced outside of Europe. So, the next time you hear someone dismiss this era as the Dark Ages, you can tell them the truth. It was an age of brilliant manuscripts, soaring cathedrals, revolutionary inventions, and bustling global trade. It was the age that gave us algebra, algorithms, universities, and the experimental method. It wasn't dark. It was just waiting for us to look closer and see the light that was shining all along. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey through history as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical myths you'd like to see us tackle next. Until then, stay curious,